Hello, listeners. Welcome to Women Seeking Wholeness. This is a brand new era of the feminine. And if you're at all feeling it, which I'm sure you are if you're listening to this, if you stick with me in this podcast, you know that you have a part in it. You know that there's something calling you to be more, to show up in your true authenticity and to lead other people to their own. So this is a podcast for women who long to feel, express, and be, not just dream about, but be who they truly are. And today we've got a deeper concept. If you're not familiar with archetypes, if you're not familiar with how mythology shapes our cultures and our abilities to relate to each other and to life and to our bodies and to all the systems we attach to, then this will be one you'll really want to tune into. With Dr. Jaffa, we go really deep into this concept of how literally disease can show up in your body as an awakener to the larger issues that play in society. And for those of you who aren't really versed in emotional causality or, the vibrational energy of emotion and how it can run amok in our systems without our conscious awareness, if that's a new thing to you, which for most people it's really not, they understand the connection to the mind body and how really the Western traditional treatment models aren't serving us in looking at the deeper connectivity to how our psyches and the stories that we're living out and playing within us are contributing to some of these patterns of disease. So that could happen generationally in the form of epigenetics, neurogenesis, and all of these, energetic patterns that are playing out in our bodies that way. There's that. And then there's also just true gene patterns. They both have an interplay happening. They both really affect our body constitution, the way we think, behave, emote, and relate to life and to ourselves. So exploring that is something that I do in this episode with this brilliant Dr. Jaffa Vernon Frank, because of what she's lived in her body with endometriosis for so long, for 40 years. Being an academic and a mental health counselor, she's kind of morphed mythology and depth psychology into trauma, grief, loss, and the therapy work that she has done for not only herself, but others, and how altruism and archetypes and the evolution of consciousness really shape us. And she actually teaches that at a college in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I wouldn't say it's a highbrow discussion necessarily. It's just a different way of looking at what's happening in your body and the stories that you're living out. And the things that maybe you're suffering through are a means for you to really climb into and heal in a different way, through story, through character relation, the death and rebirth of the goddess, and how that might be living out in your own being. I always like to bring into my podcast different ways of looking at things beyond what's just on the surface. So depth psychology is a huge passion of mine, and I hope you enjoy our discussion. And remember to check out standspeakshine.com, where I'll be offering a program which will include archetypal studies in January. And I'm taking a first beta group through that will be really climbing deep into more of that interpersonal work and how you can align with what's happening both globally with this new era of the feminine, and also how that's landing in your body and how you're going to gift the planet with your own awakening. So again, standspeakshine.com. But without further ado, let's bring in Dr. Jaffa Vernon Frank. Well, Jaffa, I am so excited to explore this topic because my listeners know this about me. I like to talk about things that aren't mainstreamy norm. And when our mutual friend, Dr. Jennifer Selig, she introduced us. And we know her through Pacifica Graduate Institute in Santa Barbara because I love that place. And I took a Writing Down the Soul course there. And just got so enamored with archetypal studies and Jungian psychology and Marion Woodman and all that jazz. And it's just so up my alley. In fact, I was going to go into a master's and doctorate program in archetypal studies with the Jungian, depth psychology with the Jungian archetypal studies emphasis. And so I wanted to introduce my listeners to this world and why it's so relevant today. So tell me how you came into the space of even going into mythical studies. Because for some people, that's like the woo, but it's actually super grounded in rational, conscious academic thought, right? It's a real deal for how we're moving and progressing in the consciousness.
Absolutely. And actually, the path that I took to get to studying mythological studies and depth psychology at Pacifica had very little to do with sort of academic dreams or goals, and had everything to do with lived experience and making sense of lived experience. And so because of experiences throughout my life that were really challenging, making sense of those, having a sense of meaning, so that things didn't seem quite so random, just sort of was an inner drive, not really that much of a decision, but sort of an inner drive, part of my character. And I think what really lit a fire probably was encountering Joseph Campbell in the 80s, and particularly his interviews with Bill Moyers, which was really an opportunity for the sort of mythic perspective, the archetypal perspective, to come into everyday culture in America. And it certainly caught me. And then just sort of led me down this long path of reading him, and then discovering Jung, and then discovering Hillman, and discovering Marion Woodman, and just sort of one stepping stone after another, and encountering Pacifica on the internet, the Graduate Institute, feeling like that was probably out of reach because I was raising kids and I lived in another state, and just lots of obstacles that my brain put up for me. But eventually, after about 20 years, I got there. And so what I discovered once I started studying there was what I had already intuited, which is that it is very grounded, like you said, that there is an imaginal piece to it that's so profound and nurturing and creative. But the idea that the imaginal is split from matter, is split from embodiment, is really sort of an illusion. And the stories themselves show us that. And I've always loved the stories. I've loved the myths. And really with the idea of mythological studies is that mythologies are worldviews, so that even our religions are sort of mythologies. Our scientific paradigm is a mythology, because often myth is related to falsehood. We've kind of, that's sort of the way that the language has gone. But in fact, in the kind of mythology that I'm engaged with, myth just points to a deeper set of truths, or an additional set of truths. Maybe it's even a better way to say it, so that it doesn't negate any other set of truths, but it just expands, deepens, and offers additional ways of perceiving and understanding our world and making sense of things that can seem overwhelming or unbearable, such as grief, loss, death, suffering, pain, illness, any of those kind of things that are really difficult, and helps us to not have to push those things away. So that was sort of how I got there and have stayed.
Right. Well, so tell me a little bit more. I mean, because I love, so if people are just, so the title of your book is super intriguing. Eyes of the Gorgon, Endometriosis, Mythic Embodiment and Freedom. So most people, okay, so the two things that stand out to me, the obvious is endometriosis. What does that have to do with Eyes of the Gorgon? And what is Eyes of the Gorgon? Obviously, it's a mythical,
right?
It's a mythical creature that represents something within our consciousness that is doing something to women. That's just where my brain went first. But then I was like, oh, but then there's a freedom piece. So what is Eyes of the Gorgon in terms of that mythical? Yeah. Explore that with us a little bit.
Right. Yeah, of course. So the Gorgon is a mythic entity Medusa is probably the best known of all the Gorgons, but she's one of three sisters in Greek mythology, and they're three goddesses. And then sort of one of the paradoxical twists with Medusa is that she's both a goddess and a mortal. So there's already something interesting going on there, right? But the tradition of the Gorgon is much older than the Greek stories, and generally, and kind of found across other cultures as well. There are other kinds of deities, goddesses that are essentially like Gorgons, and they're fearsome faces usually. Other times they are fearsome faces attached to bodies that are also very powerful. But basically, they are feminine archetypes. So they're goddesses. They're represented as goddesses, and they are often protectors. So that you'll have images of Gorgon-like images or Gorgons themselves at on temples, at the front doors of temples, to guard against defilers entering the sacred space. They were also really widespread throughout ancient Greece on all kinds of household objects, on ovens to protect people from being harmed when they were cooking, on roof tiles, they were on jewelry. So there's this idea that they protect by reflecting back the evil or ugly face. They push that evil or ugliness away. And so they're tied to
it kind of reminds me.
Eye.
Yeah, I'm having images of the goddess Kali, Kali, would she fit into that archetype?
Yeah.
She's come up a lot for people.
She kind of would. She's like the expanded. Yeah, definitely. And she's like the expanded version of, like, the more complete image of what the Gorgon is sort of just an emblem of. So goddesses like Kali. There's an ancient Sumerian goddess called Ereshkigal, who was the sister of Inanna. A lot of people have heard of Inanna or Ishtar. So Ereshkigal is her sister, and we call it like a catonic, is the word that I like to use. It means sort of earth-based. People can say dark goddesses, but I think we're kind of needing to grow past that kind of languaging. But they're associated with mystery. They're associated with the really intense emotions. They're associated with qualities that typically, in sort of patriarchal, one-sided, ego, rational kind of paradigm, they're associated with qualities that of the feminine that are rejected, the qualities of the feminine that are pushed into the subconscious, that are demonized. And so often when we think of the Gorgon, we think of the Medusa, we think of the hideous face with the snakes, for hair, and the tongue lolling out, and
which
that
honestly, that
turns everyone to stone.
That image is in a lot of Disney movies. Like, I'm thinking of Little Mermaid, and I can't remember, Ursula, a couple of others that I'm just start coming to mind that comes up a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and it still really is a part of popular culture. I mean, if you do a simple Google Images search of Medusa or Gorgon, you get all kinds of and also hypersexual sexuality and procreative creativity, and the demonic, and so that starts to get to where that connects with endometriosis, because this imagery around the Gorgon has been demonized, the Medusa as sort of a demon monster. And yet she's got a lineage into these more complex great goddess kinds of traditions that scholars who have done archaeology throughout Europe and Africa and the Middle East, have theorized about these sort of goddess cultures, or these cultures that pre-patriarchal cultures that were more aligned with great goddesses. the lineage for the Gorgon goes right back into that and into these more full-bodied, complex goddesses that were that were goddesses of life, but also of death and regeneration, because death and regeneration were always connected. You really didn't have death wasn't demonized and in the same way. It was still probably pretty scary because it's this incredible transformation and metamorphic change that is really pretty intense for humans to deal with. But it was always connected to the reality of regeneration. So she's got this deep lineage, and that's what I discovered when I really did the research. This deep connection to these more complex deities that have to do with yes, death and also regeneration, as death actually being the place from which life emerges. And those are really different ways of thinking about it than we typically do these days here in our culture. So then that connected into these experiences of, dis-ease. I have a history with endometriosis basically my whole life. And it's been a very demanding life partner. It's created a lot of pain and suffering and loss, and it's cost me a great deal. And I sort of, the connection between the Medusa and the disease, I have to say, was actually an intuitive kind of connection. It's not something that I woke up one morning and thought with my brain. I think that endometriosis is Medusan. In fact, it really came out of dreams, and it came out of other kinds of intuitive experiences of the disease that then, when I really got into researching the disease, had these amazing kinds of concrete mirrorings. For example, one of the traditions around the Gorgon is that her blood is both healing and it can also be deadly. So when she's beheaded, because in the traditional Greek story, the goddess Athena, with the help of the hero Perseus, beheads the Medusa. And they collect the blood out of her neck, and out of one side, the blood is healing, and out of the other side, the blood can kill. And Athena gives that blood to the god of healing, the Greek god of healing, Asclepius. So he gets the sort of pharmacon, as we call it, his pharmacy of medicines. He gets that from the Medusa's head. So there's this idea that her blood is both healing and destructive. Well, it struck me that my blood, because endometriosis is typically considered a menstrual disorder, and you have tissue very similar to what's inside the uterus, outside the uterus, where it's basically causing internal bleeding every month as it follows the cycle, the hormone cycle. And it causes all this scarring, and it can cause the reproductive organs, to really turn to stone, which is another link. But this idea that the blood that is my creative blood, my procreative blood, my blood of life, can also be this blood of death, because the disease has actually threatened my life and more than once. And I also had near-death experiences because of hemorrhaging caused by the disease. So I had this idea of, wow, this blood that is both healing and destructive, this female blood, this particular kind of blood. And then this idea, too, that this disease can turn the reproductive organs into stone. And I actually had a condition that they call frozen pelvis, which is when all of the reproductive organs just become so calcified with scar tissue that they are like stone. And I remember when I find one of the final surgery that I underwent, the surgeon, likened the work that he had done to scraping concrete out of my abdomen. So those kinds of things emerged after this initial intuitive sense of this sort of Gorgonian visitation, this sort of idea that this disease was something. Yes, it was biological. Yes, it was physiological. And also there was something going on psychologically or spiritually that I needed to understand so that I could live with this, because it wasn't going to go away.
So,
And that's the embodiment piece, the mythic embodiment piece. Yeah.
Yeah. This is really fascinating. I think some of our listeners may have a struggle unless they're really versed in emotional vibrational causation of disease, and that's been a huge aspect of my career in emotional, kind of like holistic psychology, is bridging that understanding for people from a physiological, organic, biochemical standpoint. So maybe I could just insert that here, because for some people that's a huge leap to go, oh my gosh, what does an or what is how does a mythological collective consciousness archetype, what does that have to do with my body?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we are playing out a lot of these, everything from fairy tales to mythological, creatures and all this. They do affect our psyche. They do affect, on the unconscious level. I will say that when you brought up dis-ease, so that's a huge part of what I teach is, all disease is some kind of disconnection or some kind of maladjustment, if you will, from authenticity or pure alignment or truth. So when we're talking about endometriosis, because I know that there's thyroid issues, there's a lot of things women struggle with that are, pretty exclusive to some kind of underlying collective consciousness, pervasive issue, right? And that's not to say that we can generalize that to everyone. But if we're just going to bridge this for our listeners a little bit in how our bodies, because everyone's connected. There's a, I like to think of it as like a little tapestry that's being woven through every body and every person, that we're all together in this universe, and we're all kind of, we're all unified in the field. And so what will show up, in your body versus somebody else that has endometriosis, right? It might not be the same. Maybe we can speak to that a little bit. So you walked through endometriosis, I think that's for 40 years, right? So speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, or more. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really important for many, many reasons. One of which, and women who've dealt with endometriosis, I've read so many accounts and been on the internet, reading in support room, chat rooms, and just on and on. So many accounts, and my own personal experience of this idea that that we're just crazy, right? There's a huge delay in diagnosis because women, our accounts of our own bodies aren't really taken seriously. Endometriosis has a terrible history, along with other menstrual disorders, a terrible history with Western medicine and other traditions. But it really, I looked at Western medicine, this is part of my own paradigm, for not taking this seriously and just saying it's quote unquote all in our heads. And so it's a real hot button for women who have endometriosis, and I have a hunch women who have other conditions and who've dealt with other kinds of medical conditions to start talking about this imaginal relationship to the disease, or that somehow that what I call embodied misogyny can cause endometriosis. And so I make it really clear, and I want to make it clear again, that the mystery of the relationship between the mind and the body is just that. It's a mystery. My experience doesn't support this idea that we've had for a long time, that the mind and the body are split. That just doesn't align with my experience in any way. And more around us in our culture, we're seeing more and more challenges to that idea that they're split and not related. That being said, I don't see a direct linear cause between my thoughts and manifesting this disease, my beliefs and manifesting this disease. There's no scientific proof, for example, that trauma, childhood sexual trauma causes the disease, which for a while, that was one of the favorite theories. In the 80s, when I was diagnosed, the favorite theory was that women who had endometriosis were high-strung, overeducated, uppity women who had put off childbearing for too long, and just wanted a piece of the power, and endometriosis was sort of proof about how bad that was for women. I mean, I encountered that, and have since encountered it in the literature and from other women's testimonies. So I have to be really aware, and I am really aware of this easy literal linking of the mind and the body. And yet I'm simultaneously really aware of the mystery of that interconnection. And so for me, is less about, this isn't about cure as such, right? So that's why I discern between cure and healing, because endometriosis is not actually a disease they can cure. They don't even know what actually causes it. Now, there are treatments, and most of the treatments center around pain control and helping women with their fertility, because about a little more than a third of women who have endometriosis have fertility issues. But it's not really about cure. It was about what is the story? What's the deeper story that's going on for me? What can I intuit? What can I unconceal through a process of relating with my body, through my creative imagination, through my practices that kind of harness that, which depth psychology, archetypal psychology offers, shamanic traditions offer, even modern trauma treatment offers some ideas and some ways of interacting between mind and body and bridging that. So that became interesting to me, because I'm going to have to live with this, and my choice is to live in joy and love, or my choice is to live in fear and contraction. So I make the choice to live and enjoy and love, and that means having a story about this. And I mean story in with the most deep reverence for what that word actually means. A worldview, an understanding based in my experience that is really nourishing. And I just happen to find it in the myths. And it's not a prescription, right? It's a description. And so that's what my story offers. It's a description of how this could work by engaging the symbols, and the symbols that, for me, spoke to my experience of endometriosis. First started out as Medusa, and then got more, as I got curious about that symbol. I think curiosity is such a big piece of wisdom. We want to know, but maybe it's sometimes more useful just to continue to be curious and let it and let it reveal itself. So as I got curious, it got deeper, and it even led me, through some other traditions, like the Sumerian tradition with Inanna and Ereshkigal, and then also it led me back to the surprising place, which was Athena, and Athena had never been one of my favorites. Because she seemed like kind of a sellout to me. And so it was surprising, it was unexpected, and it's not literal. It's very, very much an unfolding. And it had to do with a deep sense of psychological wholeness and non-victimization that I was hungry for, because all the other models, the medical model and the social models of understanding that I was encountering, they were just not, they didn't feel right. They didn't feel good. They weren't nourishing. They weren't empowering. They were about being a victim. They were about, brokenness. They were about my body is disease. I'm like, wait, this is my body. This is a sacred vessel. what is going on? So you're right. It is really important, I think, to recognize, for me at least, that there's a mysterious connection between mind and body.
Yeah. And I've often heard,
I'm not saying that this is a direct cause. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's fine.
Sorry, we have a little bit of a delay, but just to kind of bring it back to people who are kind of like, how do I make this connection for myself? I think what you're saying is powerful, that it isn't literal. So when we're talking about like Medusa and Kali and Athena and all these, it's just kind of like the same as Wonder Woman, right? Or some relevant figure for you that represents, and you could go with Disney characters, the more empowered Disney women that are, like maybe Mulan or something. But these are figures who offer symbology that we can practically attach to a deeper story that empowers us to get underneath and to get into, would you say, kind of ensouling that power, or bringing that, because people learn through, we learn through story. We learn through the lived experience of others. That's the most relevant, or I guess you could say the most it's where our brain can attach to something real. And when you're talking about the mind and body, the body is the mind is the body. So yeah, for you, it was like, oh, that really lit you up to learn about Medusa and bring that, all of those symbols and all of that meaning into your own body and go, wow, how can I take this character and everything that she is about, this hope and this empowerment, to help me? How did that practically help you heal that, I guess, is my question.
Right.
How did you walk into that embodiment? Right.
Well, I think the first piece is what you're kind of pointing to, is this idea of what is an archetype, right? And why should we care?
Yeah.
So the idea of the archetype is that there are these sort of patterns in our patterns of potential, like, response and understanding that exist in our psyches. Kind of the same way that there are patterns of behavior and response in our bodies. We call those instincts, right? But in the psyche, what Carl Jung theorized was that those same kinds of patterns exist. So we have these patterns because we all have the same basic brain structure, all of us humans. So the pattern of, like, the nurturer. And in some cultures that, and often in many cultures, because of our shared physiology, the nurturer archetype is a feminine archetype. It's a mother, the good mother archetype. But it doesn't have to be. It could be nature. It could be something else. But the pattern is the nurturer, or the pattern is whatever, the sage, or the pattern, whatever. So those patterns exist, and then cultures and individuals, our psyche has the capacity, the ability to, like, to generate an image that captures that pattern. And those images are the archetypal images. So yeah, our art and religions and dreams are full of these archetypal images. And the idea is that you can they're concrete and specific. So, like, my engagement with Medusa and Athena is really specific and very concrete to me. It doesn't mean that someone else might not be able to connect with it. And in fact, I've had some women who've already been in touch with me saying, oh my gosh, I always thought my endometriosis was Medusa. And then other people, it's not going to have resonance for. But there'll be some other archetypal pattern. There'll be some other image that captures that archetypal pattern for that person. And you're right, you can look around us in our culture, and we can also look into our own dream life, which I think is so valuable, Or if we're creative artists, we can look into the imagery that goes into our creative art. And we can trust our hearts and our souls in terms of what we deepest connect with, those images we deeply connect with. And we can trust that as the beginning of the information of, that seems to be part of what this is about for me. And then we can get curious and follow that image. And that's what I did. So I needed to lay out a pretty methodical process, because that's sort of the way my mind works. I tend to be a person who's constantly bridging between the rational and the embodied. And so for me, the first step was really understanding this disease, because when I was first diagnosed with it, there really wasn't much information. And honestly, there really wasn't much of an internet yet. So it was hard to research. And also, I was really busy raising my family, working, and living with pain. So I didn't have a lot of time or energy. And I guess in some ways, I just didn't put myself first. So it was much later. I wasn't doing this research until, 10 years ago. And so I really had to lay out what the disease was. And I do that in the book too. And it's kind of a long chapter, and it could be kind of, I recognize that it's sort of like, wow, this is a lot of information dedicated to this disease. But I wanted to get to know this disease as the partner that it has been. I mean, I've lived with it pretty much my whole life. And I really wanted to get it. And so once I had that concrete understanding, then I started looking at the myths, all the stories about Medusa. And I'm looking at the art, because the stories are also in the art, in the images. And I just let them flow without, much of an agenda. And then that led me to the next thing. And the next thing happened to be Athena, because the place that we tend to see the Gorgon is on Athena's armor, on her aegis, on her breastplate. So that led me to her. And I got curious about what's that about, and what is the meaning of Athena beheading Medusa? Because there's this tradition that is a sort of like a destruction of the female monster, of the feminine monster, by the patriarch's daughter, right? Because Athena is Zeus's favorite. She's Zeus's daughter. She's the representation of the feminine in the Greek tradition, which is very, very misogynistic, very phallocentric, very patriarchal. So I thought, what is going on with that? And so after I'd followed through all the stories, and I started to get a sense of what might be going on with that, and which led me into other stories, then I sat down and looked at my own experiences, the big experiences of endometriosis that I've had. Kind of a look at my childhood, my development as a young woman, and what it was like to be a young woman in the 60s, 70s in this country, and in my family, and what the story started to inform my understanding of what I had experienced. I started to have a deeper understanding of the context that I had grown up in, and then I looked at I had I was diagnosed with endometriosis. I had probably had about a 10-year delay in diagnosis, which is it's pretty typical. And then once I was diagnosed, there was a lot of concern about fertility, even though I hadn't really been tested for fertility. I didn't know if I had an issue or not. But I was about to get married anyway, and it just seemed like, okay, we'll just do that. We'll have kids. And my first pregnancy was post treatment with a medication called danazol. And I got pregnant with twins. And what happened with that first pregnancy was that in about the 7th month, my uterine artery ruptured and I hemorrhaged. And both my sons were stillborn, and I had a near-death experience because of the hemorrhaging. And so I that experience obviously was incredibly formative, and it was completely disintegrating. And it really got my attention because the disease caused, as far as what we understand a little bit then, but much more now, was that sometimes pregnancy really helps endometriosis get better. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it actually stimulates it. And there was something about my physiology that it stimulated it, and that the growth of endometriosis on the uterine artery caused it to be weak and to rupture. So, but it's just a bizarre, 1 in a million kind of thing. But in fact, after that experience, I got really curious about what this disease meant. And also then, as I revisited that experience through the lens of all these stories that I'd been reading about, and all this art I'd been looking at about Medusa and the Gorgon tradition, I started to have a different understanding of what that experience might be about for me. And I'd already worked through it, and had some ideas about it, and had some sort of frameworks and stories. I'd done a lot of healing back when this happened, because this was, 1990. It was a long time ago. But really, this work with Medusa really allowed me to have a different perspective, or a more expanded perspective, about what that particular episode might be about for me. And so I look at that episode in my life, and then I look at, I went on to have 2 healthy daughters over time. And so I looked at what that experience was like. And then ultimately I did end up having to have a hysterectomy about 10 years ago, because I had invasive endometriosis in my bowel, and it was also constricting my ureters, so it was going to cause kidney damage. So again, the disease continued to be a really aggressive, and so I looked at my hysterectomy, which I had resisted for a long time, because I was kind of attached to my reproductive organs, even though that I had a lot of pain. And so, for example, that hysterectomy piece, the way that the myths informed that for me, was I really got a sense of that was almost like the beheading process within me, because for me, the beheading process was about reclaiming Medusa. She had become a monster. In the story, Medusa is a beautiful young woman. She's so beautiful, she attracts the attention of Poseidon. Poseidon rapes her in Athena's temple. Athena sees this and is appalled, but she punishes Medusa by turning her into the monster, the Gorgon. So that's one version. There's all these versions of these stories, right? So that's one version. So that's the version I got curious about with what's this beheading about? Is it really the destruction of the evil feminine, the evil sexual feminine? What is this? There's all these, Freud had some things to say about it, and other people have had things to say about it that just didn't ring true for me. So what I started to look at was what happened after that. The hero Perseus, who is sort of the tool that Athena uses. She uses him, but she guides his hand to cut off the Gorgon's head and all this. He goes on then to have some adventures with the Gorgon's head before he returns it to Athena. And so I turned to those stories, and what I saw was this whole pattern of restoration, through the beheading. Ultimately, the Gorgon's head, which is the seed of that regenerative death and regeneration, the seed ends up on part of Athena, and it really becomes part of her identity, and it really completes her, because without that, she is a very patriarchal female, and I could relate to that growing up. And once she's got that dark goddess, or that Chthonic goddess, or that lineage of the great goddess, once that's returned to her, she's complete. And it's not split. In fact, she's quite whole. And that emblem sits upon her chest at her heart chakra in the field of transpersonal love. And that's where that chthonic truth of the great goddess belongs. This idea that we have to embrace all of life, that even death and illness and hardship and loss are a part of our human experience, and not to be rejected, not to be morbidly wallowed in, or, not to have some sort of strange masochistic relationship with, but this deep, accepting, non-judgmental relationship with all of life. And that as a female who participates in that, and life and giving life and losing life in my own body, because I'd had that experience, that I was really a part of that cycle, and that I was really a part of the Gorgon was a part of me. But as long as she was sort of down in my reproductive organs, she was causing a lot of problems. As long as I had this contentious relationship with my body, and now again, I don't see that as a direct cause of the disease, but it was my ability to live joyfully in my female body was inhibited. And until I could have that experience of it being in my loving heart chakra, where I could really start to try to let go of control and perfectionism and those things that keep me from being an embodied human being, an embodied woman in relation to the divine.
Wow. So that was a lot of,
I know it's a lot.
Well, no, just, I think because you are so intelligent and because you are a depth researcher, you were able to use that as a means to connect to the symbols of what these goddesses ensouled and embodied, and brought that into your experience. So in a practical sense, how was it? Just learning about it and reading about it, and you sort of like visualized, like how did that, because I can't even imagine losing, you said you lost twin sons. You had a,
I had twin sons. I did. Yeah.
Wow. So,
yeah. They, because of the blood loss, I lost so much blood that they just couldn't survive. So, yeah.
And so that was a double whammy too. So
those are the kind of experiences that really, it was a definite, and those are the kinds of experiences that I have had with endometriosis that pushed it beyond me being able to just like accept it as something random, right? And that pushed me to beyond only working with the medical. I continued to work with the medical. I'm not anti-medical. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for really good doctors. And yet I also recognized that there was something here for my soul to learn, right?
Yeah.
So most people aren't going to dedicate 4 years of their life and a PhD and write a book. I get that. And you don't have to. I think the thing is this is, again, what you first said, what you mentioned about, what images really, really call to you, really resonate with you? What archetypes are speaking to you? And then, it's really this almost like a choice of like, okay, I'm going to get curious and engage with this image, this archetypal image, because my heart and soul are resonating. I can feel the emotional connection, right? We can trust our bodies. How does it feel? Get in your body. And then you can start to just sort of play with that creatively. And you can just read the stories, for fun. It doesn't have to be a big project, but sort of like, what are the stories around Wonder Woman, right? What is the story of her creator? What is she like in the comic books? Where else does she show up? What's her lineage? Because she comes out of the Amazons. And the Amazons are a whole another wonderful, rich mythology, mythological female characters. So, you can sort of follow it and be creative with it. It might be about reading the stories. It might be, you might get curious about doing some artwork, even if you don't consider yourself an artist. That's one of the ways that we've kind of robbed ourselves of our humanity, is by thinking other people are artists, or other people are dancers, or other people are singers, when we all can sing and we can all dance and we can all create. If you're creating because of out of process, that's another way of interacting. if you are the kind of person who can sort of really start to learn to engage your imagination, you can have a conversation with an archetypal image.
That's so interesting that you bring that up.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but in part of my Stand Speak Shine school, I actually did a Stand Speak Shine retreat a few weeks ago. And one of the things I have my participants do, which I actually do in my group school that I run, that I'm getting ready to launch in January, the Stand Speak Shine school, is I have women choose 5 archetypes. And I encourage them, and whether they're mythological or they're an actual person. And you get that council together and you consult with them, and there's a reason that your personality is drawn to that particular person. There's a reason, and there's some kind of soul connection.
Absolutely. And I think,
that they're bringing you to your wholeness, that you're integrating, because they're going to represent different things to you of an invitation of something that needs healed. So we really dive into having conversations with them. I have them write them a letter, because I bring up Mary Magdalene a lot. I bring up, for me personally, she's a strong figure for what needs to heal in religions with women, and also just in stepping into your own humanness, embodying the human and the divine.
Right.
Which leads me to, I know that you talk a lot about what it means to be a human woman embodying a relationship with the divine. Like how would you, because you're an academic, you're a mother, you've been through grief and loss, and obviously you have a draw or a strong desire to have a relationship with the divine. I know everyone kind of defines God differently, God and goddesses differently, but how would you say is the way we do that? How does a woman versus a man, because we have all of these, messages, misogynistic, cultural, patriarchal, all this stuff that we're trying to sort through as a collective. But how would you say a human woman embodies that relationship with the divine?
Right. Yeah. And I think all of these ideas, certainly the ideas about masculine and feminine, all this is in such flux. We're slowly, painfully learning about our own complexity. And, even this a whole gender idea is falling apart and deconstructing and reconstructing. And I really respect that. And so, I talk about woman, I talk about female, and I talk about feminine. And in the book, I have a caveat. It's like, I know that that this language is, that we're trying to change this language. But because I'm talking about a disease that is estrogen dependent, and that primarily involves the female reproductive organs, then I go ahead and commit to that language in the book. So, but I think we have to be aware when we're starting to talk about what is it to be a female or a human woman in relationship, or a human man in relationship, because there are a lot of other ways of being human than those two old categories, right? So what I can speak to is like me personally, as a heterosexual woman, and who identifies in that way. And so for me, that and maybe it can transcend any of that. It's because it goes back to like, what is my embodied experience of myself? Right? I can trust my body if I can listen to my body, if I can get in touch with it, if I can have the experiences that it's having without judging them, if I can be curious about those experiences and kind and self-forgiving and turn towards those experiences without going right into fear and fixing and brokenness and those ideas that's sort of my body teaches me when I will turn to it and with curiosity and love. And that's where I found divinity. That's where I find divinity. And I also find that when I turn to nature, which is the body, right? I turn to the body, which is nature. And that's where I encounter the divine, because that's where I encounter the mystery. That's where I encounter unconditional love. That's where, I encounter connection, reciprocity, all those qualities that I associate descriptively with the divine. So I think, I think there are many portals to the divine for humans, and you can look at religious traditions and you can look at a lot of what is going on nowadays with the kinds of workshops you're talking about, which are really ways of connecting with what I would say are ways of connecting with the deeper spiritual aspect of us, the soul. For me, it is this relationship with my body and the body and how that reveals divinity. I mean, to a certain extent, it was a choice, right? To claim Medusa as the goddess of endometriosis for me. And therefore, that makes that experience sacred. It's no longer just a physiological disease. It is still a physiological disease that I still have to treat, right? And it is a teacher. It's a soul teacher. And I have to have a certain kind of relationship with her, and I have to respect her for who she is, because Medusa is tough. I mean, she turns things to stone. She is the death goddess, death and regeneration. But wow, that is not an easy teacher. And I know because I've been in her hands. And so how do I, having that relationship is really important. And I think the other thing about it with archetypes is we need to allow them to evolve with us and on their own, so that if I engage an archetype and I think that it means a certain thing at a certain time, that's really helpful for me and really fruitful. And then it's also really important for me to not literalize and try to lock that archetype in, that it is always going to mean that to me, or that it's always going to mean that to other people, because archetypes are like living, they're energy. So they're organic and they move and they change. So over time, my Medusa has changed a lot, and her connection, the way I can relate best with her is through her connection with Athena, because when she's disembodied, she's really intense. She's more than I can really, the times when I've encountered her, it's not been easy. And so when women or men or any human, trans people, whatever is or when you're working with an archetype, it's a relationship. And in the same way that we can't control the other beings that we love, that we have to meet them and be in a relationship with them and allow them to evolve. We need to be able to do that archetypally as well. And that's by not locking in those interpretations as if they're forever, but relating. Right. And I love what you talked about with writing a letter and those kind of relational kinds of interactions, because that, to me, that's really a eros, which is the relational quality or function, is really a way to connect with the divine and have that be meaningful.
Yeah. And I love what you said about these archetypes being soul teachers, because that is exactly what Mary Magdalene has been for me. I believe she was actually a literal person, not just an archetype. But what she represents and how she shows up and the messaging and the little, I call it the divine breadcrumb trail that has come. I did a 6-part Mary Magdalene series on my podcast, and there were so many other women who are feeling her. And even at my retreat that I did a few weeks ago, we talked at length about about how it is what she represents. I mean, she's not a living being on the planet right now, but her legacy and the things that she embodied and the things that she teaches us learning through her lived experience it's so empowering. So she's just one example. I mean, she doesn't speak to everybody, but she speaks to her archetype, and what she represents doesn't speak to every woman, just like maybe Medusa doesn't necessarily speak to me personally, but inserting that, you call it like a mythopoetic approach. Whose poetry, whose life song sings to you? Which man or woman calls to you in a way that is undeniably powerful, and you can have that soul relationship with, so they can teach you the things that you need to learn in your body. I guess that's, in from a practical standpoint, yeah, I mean, writing letters to them, talking to them. I did an episode on angels just before this episode, and it was kind of the same thing, even your ancestors and figures from your religious construct. Like Joan of Arc was a person that showed up for my friend Ashley that I interviewed before you. And it's like, why is she speaking? Why is Joan of Arc showing up for me? Why am I so drawn to her? What is it about her? Well, because she had this experience with angels, and my path is angels. I'm speaking about Ashley. She had a soul path. She has a destiny to connect to angels and to, explore that for people and teach about that in this lifetime. And so I just think, we are all connected through stories. Fairy tales are another thing we didn't talk about, but fairy tales in and of themselves, I mean, all these characters are bringing a story or a pattern culturally into our current reality that can really teach us some deep things and help us to heal, not only in our in our individual lives, but for the whole of humanity and our cultures.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you're right that the fairy tales are another wonderful way of exploring archetypal imagery, and they're full of archetypes. And your point about Mary Magdalene as a concrete human being and also a mythic symbol. I mean, I think that there are definitely people who on this earth who somehow they so embody an archetype that they become the archetypal image. I mean, Mary Magdalene, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, there's no question.
They're like icons.
That
like,
can happen.
So iconic.
Yeah, they just seem to vibrate so much with that. That's right. That they can be really useful ways of symbolizing the pattern, the energetic pattern that is the archetype. And so it's a great way to be able to relate. And I think you mentioned that the question is, what are you drawn to? What is your soul drawn to? And so being able to just go ahead and trust that, and trust the imagination, because the imagination has had sort of a bad rap too. This idea of, it's just a dream. It's only your imagination. And we do need to understand that the imaginal truths are different in nature than concrete truths, just like we can understand that religious truths are different in nature than scientific truths, but they're all part of one big pattern. They're all part of an interrelated, co-arising reality. And we're part of that too. And we can participate in co-creating that when we're in touch with these figures, these archetypes that really resonate with us and that can really help us heal. And I do think that resonates into a greater healing. I never would have written the book, because it was like, otherwise, what's the point if we're not serving others, if we're not serving life? That's a very deep value, I think, at least for me. So, yeah.
Well, I think that your book is such a beautiful, deep exploration into using a figure like Medusa and the Gorgon to really amplify your awareness around not only your own body, but how you are in relation to all that is, and how you chose one character to really dive deep into that internal imagery and dialogue and exploration and research, and how that just even that focus was an actual tool to heal you. So you have a lot of, I'm assuming this is part of your doctoral dissertation, because you have so many, so you've researched this so thoroughly that there's like a whole thing of footnotes, like several pages of footnotes. And I just am like, and even like you're talking about like the Beauty and the Beast and all of these things, like, coming into Athena. And, I just think we can, I think the message for me here in all of this is we can embody and we can integrate, so we can create anything, really. If we can see it and we can climb into it and visualize it, we can embody it. And to me, that's the biggest message of kind of what you're bringing into the space of archetypes for women, and how that collective consciousness, it's time that we as women look at how we can show up in our own iconic way and claim who we actually are, and how individualized that is, how personal and sacred that is.
And it's really, the gift that each individual can bring to this world is a fullest expression of her own genius, right? As her inborn soul's gift to this world. And, we understand experience. We create experience by storying it. We tell stories. That's how we organize our experience. And everything starts in the non-material. Everything starts as an idea or an energetic, like an idea. It's a non-material thing. It all starts there. And then we are the conduit to, through our consciousness. Consciousness is causal, and we can then create in this world, especially if we're willing to not try to control it all. And we're not overly attached to the way it looks as an outcome. If we can just really participate in our own authentic way and get guidance from the archetypes that really resonate in us, we really have this unique, each of us, I really believe this, that we each have this unique gift to bring to the world, and that the world needs it. And that, that's the gift of each of our individual lives, is to fulfill that. And be that and offer that to our community and to ourselves, because we really have to come, I think, from a deeply loving place. And we didn't have a chance to really talk that much about the shame piece, but really this idea of sacred shame and different kinds, and the way that shame can shut us down completely. But then there's also this idea of an older idea of shame as this deep sense of self-knowledge, and that I do have limitations. I am imperfect because I'm human, and that's what it is to be human. And that's fine. And I can still forgive myself and love myself and be complete, and have self-reverence. And there was a meaning of shame that was about self-reverence in older traditions. So that really starts there. And then we can fulfill our genius, not our perfection, but our unique genius as a gift to the world. And I think that's really
powerful.
Gives life a deep resonance and meaning. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I would encourage people to, if they want to dive deeper into how they can experience freedom through mythic embodiment and really land into that, as you have with healing endometriosis. I think that is this is a beautiful work. So I'm going to put this in the show notes where people can even find it on Amazon, Eyes of the Gorgon, Endometriosis, Mythic Embodiment and Freedom. Thank you so much, Dr. Jaffa, for being on this episode and helping us dive deep into this beautiful healing power of the archetypes and the mythological archetypes.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed having an opportunity to speak with you and just really loved it. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. I think we play out so many different archetypes without even knowing about it. Some of you are the mother, the teacher, the healer, the pioneer, the nurturer, the listener. I mean, it's endless, but there will be some that rise to the surface, some archetypes, some characters, male or female, that you so deeply resonate with because they are in some way you and they embody characteristics that you are on some level longing to incorporate and integrate into your own being so you can show up in your authenticity. So I'd encourage you to explore what those archetypes and who those archetypes are and what they represent in their character form that is going to embolden you to step into your true embodied path. Remember to go to standspeakshine.com, standspeakshine.com, if you're interested in exploring who you truly are and you really want to take 2020 as your year to step into your true authentic self. That will be January 6th that we're launching, but I'm taking students through registration at this very moment. So if you're interested, go fill out that form and apply. And I hope that you will join us because it is time. Now is your time to step into who you truly are. Have a great week.